Now, but first, before we dive in our expert panel analysis, I want to give you my takeaways from the Mueller report and a few things that you need to keep in mind. Number one, the president and his team, they went above and beyond in their transparency in dealing with the special counsel's office. This openness in and of itself cuts against any suggestions you might be hearing on the other cables about obstruction of justice. My friends, if Trump wanted to obstruct justice, he wouldn't have waived executive privilege. Now, if you don't know what that is, it's the doctrine which would have shielded much of the president's internal communications from investigators and from the public. But he didn't do that. In fact, I would argue, remember, I was a former criminal defense lawyer myself, clerked at the court. I would argue that the president's team may have gone overboard in giving Mueller too much information. But anyway, this demonstrates the president's supreme confidence in his own innocence from the very beginning. He had nothing to hide. And by the way, the transparency even extended to the release of the report itself. Remember, the American people are getting much more than is required by law. And Bill Barr, he didn't have to do this synopsis of the report. He didn't have to answer press questions this morning. He didn't even have to release the report to the public or to Congress. His only obligation was to report his findings to Congress. That's it. Number two, the media coverage of this Russian collusion, coordination, conspiracy story was an epic failure from beginning to, well, right about now. Now, remember the Trump Tower meeting in June of 2016?
The meeting at Trump Tower and all the lies to cover up that meeting. That, to me, is direct evidence.
All of this talk about a second meeting is truly damning.
Trump Tower meeting, which indeed was convened for the purpose of collusion.
All false. It turns out that Mueller found there was no evidence that President Trump had any advance knowledge of the Trump Tower meeting or was involved in it in any way. Now, they also did not find, by the way, that Donald Trump Jr. or any participant in the meeting violated any law. Instead, the report said, quote, the government does not have strong evidence of surreptitious behavior or efforts at concealment at the term of the June 9th meeting. Well, the story turned out to be a complete and total farce and dud. And then, oh yeah, by the way, Carter Page, he worked for the Trump campaign as a foreign policy advisor, at least his name was on an advisory list for 8 months. The FBI, though, got a FISA warrant to surveil Page, citing that fake dossier funded by Trump's opponent.
Carter Page was conspiring with Russia in ways that were nefarious.
He should have been surveilled.
It would not have been very difficult for the FBI to convince a judge that there was probable cause to believe that Carter Page was acting as an agent of a foreign power.
But in the end, Mueller writes on page 95 that his team, quote, did not establish that Page coordinated with the Russian government in its efforts to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. Remember, there were 4 FISA warrants, all of them incomplete. Another abuse of power by the Obama FBI and the rest of the deep state. Number 3. For all of that, all that we already talked about, the Mueller report is really kind of just an invitation, when you read it, especially toward the end, for the House of Representatives to run the ball to the impeachment goal line. The resistant media and some left-wing Dems are now hanging their impeachment hopes, now no collusion, on the fact that Mueller did not specifically exonerate Trump on obstruction of justice. Today, they were grasping at more straws and making a lot of Trump's reaction to the appointment of the special counsel when he said, oh my God, this is terrible. This is the end of my presidency. I'm, well, blanked. The press claims that's the reaction of a guilty man.
This
This is the end of my presidency. I'm effed. He slumped back in his chair, according to the report, and said, oh my God, this is terrible. This is the end of my presidency. I'm effed.
What is laid out here, rats, crazy S, I'm effed, all this stuff in there, is that not enough?
But when Trump said it was the end of my presidency, it was because he believed he was a man unfairly accused, and rightly he was enraged over the fact that his entire agenda would be stymied and his presidency mired in years of investigation. He understood that from the very beginning. I don't blame him for being that mad. It certainly isn't any evidence of an intent to obstruct. Anyone who says differently should either have his law license revoked or, frankly, not be commenting on these matters on television. Go do something else. But the left is sitting here claiming that Mueller's findings convict Trump of obstruction, even though Mueller stated that he could not draw such a conclusion. Here's what he says on page 8 of Volume 2. Quote, unlike cases in which a subject engages in obstruction of justice to cover up a crime, the evidence we obtained did not establish that the president was involved in an underlying crime related to Russian election interference. Although the obstruction statutes do not require proof of such a crime, the absence of that evidence affects the analysis of the president's intent and requires consideration of other possible motives for his conduct. Judgments about the nature of the president's motives during each phase would be informed by the totality of the evidence. And Barr and the legal team at DOJ did examine the totality of evidence and even used Mueller's legal framework to analyze his findings on obstruction. After 2 years and $30 million taxpayer money, the Democrats will not accept the Justice Department's findings, Barr's findings. And they plan to relitigate the entire drama. One way or another, they're going to try to do it from now until 2020. But what they should be investigating is how this farce began and who was responsible, what their motives were. The surveillance of innocent Americans, the deception in the FISA court applications, the illegal leaking of government documents and information, and the entire Mueller probe were never about holding a president accountable. The purpose was to destroy Trump and his agenda in order to regain political power.